So now I can save this and I can run my project. Again, to run foundation, we needed to do steps. We needed to have one annotation, and we needed to have annotations instead of working and work contemporary stop validating with this annotation and validation will take place. So let me run this application. Provide a valid password. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 characters. Let's send this and now it works. It should be stopped. invalidation directly, look at invalidation constraints, and many of them, we can scroll down, have a look at what constraints are valid and how they work, for example, and each one of them you can use in your invalidation. For example, in this example, in this video, I'm going to use AÇIKLAMA like this, to work is a declare and empty. Make sure that password, for example, if other required fields are not empty, so our user details request model ones, and we're going to do to make sure that the first name provided is not empty, for example, that the last name and other people name, if you know we have to add any additional one, all we have to do is going to add a few conditions that will go to the validation. So what to do in the validation, I will add the new notation just before the request of validation, and that notation is called want to make sure are not null. For example, last name, email address, and password, I want to make sure they're not empty. Now, if one of them is missing and is null, an error message will be displayed. The calling client application that receives HTTP response will receive HTTP status code 400, which is a bad request, and it will contain a message describing why this particular request can take a by the example we cannot for because it seems fine be it if green. So first to make sure we got to do two steps and we needed to add valid annotation, and we needed to add the annotations inside our beam. And if we want to temporarily stop validating, we will remove this annotation and validation will not take place. So let me run this application. I think it has started, and now I will switch to a postman and I will send HTTP request and see how it works. So send the request, and we got back 400 bad request, so it has failed. Let's scroll down and see why it has failed.
Hi. In this project, we are going to validate from or not this for the bottom level here is what if here as 1.ol is annotated with @Spring Boot application. So it depicts that this is the get mapping to perimeter. The perimeter as data that will be mapped to string. This is the use path. I'm just printing Spring Boot application. Spring Boot project is started, and as you can see, it has started on this port. So this is the 8080 validate URL. Simply sending this get pin passed, so nothing is coming in this, and as in this job, I'm sending them. But the thing is that is a sum, as you guys that is of not null is not a validation. As you can see, get data is a method and data is a parameter. It is saying must not be null. So as you can see, get data and not both of adding in this, but it has not contained data because data is null. For thing to work, we need to provide this annotation that is @validate on the class where we are providing the validation. So this validate is of Spring. As you can see, all.spring.validate. So this is of
working in Spring. Again, we have a repository in Visual Studio Code. Again, the Spring Boot version using this thing. This is for generating boilerplate code for installing this. Again, there is this user entity, and there is user controller, user service. These are not implemented yet. We are going to implement in this tutorial. And we have this user repository, which is just a basic GPA repository for handling the database operations for this user table. Again, before starting, I just want to highlight how the long book is changing our email, get ID, get password. This entity don't think as user. The method is created for the user object. Will it. So let's user service are going for is sitting in this specification. Let's here the data opening the HTTP, the H2 is it at this path, and just copying this part and table, and currently it is empty. Now users, and this was the path we have here, this one, post mapping. So we are going to send the user to this endpoint, and we are going to create a JSON open the user object. It has username, email, when the data is persistent. So we are not going to provide the ID. So we are just going to provide username, email, user1, and we receive this, the select user. Here we have we are, or let's say we are not sending path, and here we see it fails. Let's use same thing for if user object validation constraints not now. So this constraint is not now. In this request body in the user controller, we expect this request body to be valid. So if it's not valid, it's going to be rejecting the request. So, and this valid is coming from this JavaX validation. Now saving the application, and we can generate copy this piece and define Spring data source URL is JDBC colon H2 colon mem. Mem is indicating this database is going to be stored in the memory. And let's say our database name is testdb. Saving this one. And the application is restarted once again. Here, let's find the line here. And here we see H2 console available at this pad, and the database is this one. So when we go to this URL, now refreshing this one and placing this part in testdb, this data, so that here in here, and let's send this request, and we are receiving 400 bad requests. And when we go to the errors part in this response body, here we see the error is occurring for the password field, and it is saying the default message.
Hi, in this
Sizlerle birlikte burada ön biz oluşan bir yardımcı kütüphane diyebiliriz. 2009 yılından bu tarafa geliştirilen bir aslında paket. Bu paketle birlikte dediğim gibi bizim alanlarımız hızlı bir şekilde valide ederek doğrulamasını yapabiliyoruz. Bunların detaylarını blogumda zaten yazdım. Oradan da erişebilirsiniz. Adresini de vereyim. blog.blog.com'da öğrendiğim her şeyi not etmeye çalışıyorum bir seri halinde. Alan yapacağım proje bir student bu alanları birlikte temiz olacak bizim. String'tir. Ama doğru olsun. Veri tabanıyla iletişime kaplayacak bir interface olacak. Bu interface olacağı için şurada aslında ilk başta belirtmeliydim. Bir interface. Bu şekilde servisimiz sayesinde türetebileceğiz. Bu muhtemelen yeterli. Bu repository'yi kullanacak servisimi oluşturuyorum. Bu serviste de student repository'mizi kullanabileceğiz. Servis paketinin altında student servis diyelim. Bunun bir servis olduğunu tanımlıyoruz, belirtiyoruz. Bunda bir proje anlatılmış ya da
So the password must be equal or greater than 8 characters. This description is custom. We have just provided this description, and our password is 3 invalid password. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 characters. Now let's send this, and now it worked. HTTP status is now 200. Okay, so let's provide invalid email address. Let's see how it works. We send this, and we will scroll down a little bit, and we see a description that this string must be a valid formatted email address. Okay, so that worked. Also, if there are more than one field which are invalid, for example, email is invalid, and let's say first name is invalid. Let's say user provided first name as 4, like this, 1 character, 4, which is an invalid first name. So if I send this HTTP request now, I should get 2 descriptions. One of them should be about the first name, so this one is about email. If I scroll down a little bit, there should be another one about the first name. No, I don't have it. Let's go to Spring Tool Suite and see if we added validation for the first name. Right, we don't have size validation for the first name. Let me copy size, and then I will add size for the first name. For example, size must be a minimum 2 characters, like this. And I will provide a message saying that first name must not be less than 2 characters, like this. And I'll provide the same validation for last name. I'll just change the last name here. So last name can be 2 characters, so we should be fine. Okay, now I will run the application again and see how this works now. I'll switch to post now, send HTTP request, and have a look at the number of errors. So we should get 2 errors, first name and then email address. I will scroll down. The first is about email address, and the second is about first name. So the first name must not be less than 2 characters. Now, if I provide correct first name and correct email address, everything should work well. Okay, so now bean validation works. It's a powerful tool, easy to use. Just go through the documentation and see which annotations can be helpful for your beans so that you don't have to write much code to validate them. Okay, so let's continue. We are about to work on the update user details method so that we can learn how to handle HTTP put requests and work with output mapping annotation. But before we can update record, I would like to make a couple of changes into my existing class so that I can temporarily store user record so that I can update it then and return back an updated result. And to update user details, I will use a simple Java map. This will keep information in the memory, and it will lose information once we restart our application. And of course, normally when we build RESTful web services, we don't really store information in Java map or array. We use either Spring Data GPA, Hibernate, or we create custom data access object classes, which we use to store information in the database. But at this moment, we're learning how to use post mapping and get mapping and delete mapping to handle HTTP requests. So at this moment, I'm not going to go into details on how to store information into a database. So I'll scroll up here and I'll create a new property which will be of a map data type. And map will have a string which is going to be used for a key and an object which is going to be a user REST data type, and I'll call it users. Let me input map like this, and now I'll scroll down, and in the create user details, I will first check if users is equal to null. Then I will create a new hash map, and let me import hash map. Okay, and I will put the return value into users, and it will need to accept key and value. Okay, is equal to null. Then I will create a new hash map, and let me import hash map. Okay, and I will put the return value into users, and it will need to accept key and value. Key will be our user. user ID and put now, check now. Like this. And now I will scroll down, and in the create user details, I will first check if users is equal to null. Then I will create a new hash map, and let me import hash map. Okay, and I will put the return value into users, and it will need to accept key and value. Key will be our user ID, and value will be into user. Okay, and I will put the return value into users, and it will need to accept key and value. Key will be our user ID, and value will be the return value. We don't have the user ID yet, so let me quickly create one. So that will be string user ID equals, and I will use universal identifier to generate a random string, and that will be the string like this. Now I'll take user ID and I will put it as a key for my hash map, and I will also use this user ID to put it into a return value. Set user ID equals to user ID, like this. Now we have the record stored. Let's update our get user method so that we can return information from the user's map rather than the hard-coded information here. So I'm going to delete this and then update the and value will be the return value. We don't have the user ID yet, so let me quickly create one. So that will be string user ID equals, and I will use universal identifier to generate a random string, and that will be the string like this. Now I'll take user ID and I will put it as a key for my hash map, and I will also use this user ID to put it into a return value. Set user ID equals to user ID, like this. Now we have the record stored. Let's update our get user method so that we can return information from the user's map rather than the hard-coded information here. So I'm going to delete this, and then I will use if statement to check if users contains the user's map rather than the hard-coded information here. So I'm going to delete this, and then I will use if statement to check if users contains a key, which is a user ID, like this. Then I will return response entity. Now we have the record stored. Let's update our get user method so that we can return information from the user's map rather than the hard-coded information here. So I'm going to delete this, and then I will use if statement to check if users contains a key, which is a user ID, like this. Then I will return response entity, which will contain an object which I will retrieve from users by using user ID, like this. Otherwise, so I'll add else, I will return an empty response entity. So I will delete this user get ID, and then I will return no content HTTP status code. And I actually can delete this user res from here, like this. So now if we run this, we should get user record, which is stored inside of the user's hash map. Let's run. Okay, my application started. I'll bring up postman, which an object which I will retrieve from users by using user ID, like this. Otherwise, so I'll add else, I will return an empty response entity. So I will delete this user get ID, and then I will return no content HTTP status code. And I actually can delete this user res from here, like this. So now if we run this, we should get user record, which is stored inside of the user's hash. let's run. Okay, my application started. I will bring up Postman and I will use HTTP post request to create a new user. So I'll send this one and I get back user details, and now I have user ID set. So what I will do, I will copy the user ID, and now I will use the get HTTP request. So this one is HTTP get request sent to /users, and I will provide user ID here to get the details that I have stored for this user. And I'll send this HTTP request. And I should get back user representation, and this time it is an XML format. If I want to get it back in JSON, I will switch to headers, and then I will provide a header, which is accept. And the accept header, if I want to get back information as JSON, I will choose application JSON and repeat this HTTP request. And here we go. I have user details in JSON representation. So let's continue. In this video, we're going to work on the update. In this video, we're going to work on the update. We are about to work on the update user details method so that we can learn how to handle HTTP GET request and return back. So we'll keep information in the memory. In this video, we're going to apply some basic validation to our user details request. And it will lose information once we restart our application. And of course, normally when we build RESTful web services, we don't really store information in Java map or array. We use either Spring Data GPA, Hibernate, or we create custom data access object classes, which we use to store information in the database. But at this moment, we're learning how to use post mapping and get mapping and delete mapping to handle HTTP requests. So at this moment, I'm not going to go into details on how to store type, and I'll call it users. And in the create user details, okay, and I will put the return value into users. It will be the return value. We don't have the user ID yet, so let me quickly create one. So that will be string.
equals, and I will use universal identifier to generate. Going to work on the update user details mapping. And before we actually start writing Java code, let's go to Postman and have a look at the HTTP request that we're going to send. So we are going to send HTTP put request because we have created put mapping for the update user details method, and this is what we use in RESTful web services. When we create user details, we use post mapping and we send HTTP post request. When we update user details, we RESTful have created portlets. In this video, we're going to work on the update user details mapping. And before we actually start writing Java code, let's go to Postman and have a look at the HTTP request that we're going to send. So we are going to send HTTP put request because we have created put mapping for the update user details method, and this is what we use in RESTful web services. When we create user details, we use post mapping and we send HTTP post request. When we update user details, we use add put mapping annotation and we send HTTP put request. So this is going to be HTTP put request is going to be sent to /users, and after the users, we'll need to specify which user details we want to update. So we'll need to provide a user ID. How do we know this user ID? We'll most likely get it from other requests. For example, when we create user details, we get back user ID which was just created, and then we can use this user ID in the URL path to update user details that is stored under this ID. Okay, so then we provide a couple of headers. The accept header, which is application JSON in my case, and content type, which is also application JSON. By content type, we are specifying that in the body of HTTP request, we are going to send JSON, and the accept HTTP header will tell the server side which media type we want to receive back, application JSON or, for example, application XML. So the body for HTTP put request is going to be very similar to the one that we used in HTTP post request when we were creating user details. Let me copy this JSON and paste it here. So in the body of HTTP put request, when we are updating user details, we're going to include information that we need to update user details, but I'm not going to include password and email here because for updating email address, I like to use completely different flow, and for updating user password, I also like to use a different flow. So I'm not going to include email and password here. I'm going to update first name or last name only. So now our HTTP request is ready. Let's switch to our Java code and add some information that will allow us to receive this HTTP request. Let's copy it from the post mapping. So our HTTP put mapping will also consume information in either XML or JSON, and it will also produce information in XML or JSON. So I can reuse this. I'll copy and paste it here. Now, if we go back to our HTTP request, we see that it needs to include user ID as a path parameter. So we will need to update our put mapping to be able to read that path parameter. And we already have this code which is inside of our get mapping here. This is where we read path variable. Let me copy path and scroll down here into put mapping and add it here, and I'll put comma like this. Okay, so now we need to add method arguments. To read path parameter, we already have this code as well. We can use the path variable annotation to read user ID. We scroll down and paste it here. And the second method argument needs to be a request body annotation, which will allow us to read the body which is included in HTTP request. If we look at the create method, the HTTP post request, we used request body annotation to read user details from the request body. We can reuse that. I can copy this, although it will not work as it is, and this is because we have this valid annotation here. Validation will fail because our JSON, which we include in the HTTP put request, does not contain email and password. So we need to either remove this valid annotation for it to work, or we need to create a different model class for HTTP put request only. And this is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to keep the add valid annotation so that I have validation for the body of this HTTP request. But instead of user details request model, I'll create a new class which I'm going to call update user details request model. Let's do it this way. So now I'm going to go to my package, and then I'll go to the request package, and here I'll create a new class. I'll call it update user details request model, and click on finish. Now I will go into user details request model, and I will copy first name and last name, including the annotations that I have here. I'll go back to my update user details request model, and I will paste them here. And now I will generate the getters and details request model, and click on finish. Now I will go into user details. User details request model. Okay, request model. Let's do it this way. So now I'm going to go to my package, and then I'll go to the request package, and here I'll create a new class. I'll call it update user details request model, and click on finish. Now I will go into user details request model, and I will copy first name and last name, including the annotations that I have here. Go back to my update user details request model, and I will paste them here. And now I will generate getters and setters for these two fields. So I'll go to source and then generate getters and setters. Select both of them, and I will insert them after the last name. Okay. Okay, now we have the update user details model bean, and I'll go to user controller and import it. Now we have the update user them after the last paste them here. And now I will generate getters and setters for these two fields. So I'll go to source and then generate getters and setters. Select both of them, and I will insert them after the last name. Okay. Okay, now we have the update user details model bean, and I'll go to user controller and import it. Okay, so now we have finished working with the method arguments, and we are ready to update the body. Well, first of all, when we update user details, we can return the details of the updated user, or we can return an empty body. Let's return user details. So I will return user rest, and I will delete this. And now, because we have users stored in our users map, I can use this users map to get object using user ID, which was provided as a path variable. And this will return as user rest, user details, equals, but we have a constant because we already have user details. So let me call it either return value or stored user details. Stored user details like this. And I will return stored user details, but before returning them, I need to update them. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use stored user details, and I'm going to set a new first name, which I'm going to get from user details object, sent to us as a body of HTTP request. So I'm going to get first name, and I'm going to use stored user details again to set a new last name. And I'm going to set a new first name, which I'm going to get from user details object, sent to us as a body of HTTP request. So I'm going to get first name, and I'm going to use stored user details again to set a new last name. And again, the last name as well, I will use from send you detail or stored user details. Stored user details like this. And I will return stored user details, but before returning them, I need to update them. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use stored user details, and I'm going to set a new first name, which I'm going to get from user details object, sent to us as a body of HTTP request. So I'm going to get first name, and I'm going to use stored user details again to set a new last name. And again, the last name as well, I will use from user details object, which we have received from the body of HTTP put request. Get last name, like this. And now, because user details is updated, before returning it, we will update our users map so that we have an updated user object stored first to put a new object, which is going to be stored under user ID key, and it will have the value of stored user details, like this. Okay, and then we will return stored user details. So let's run our application now and see if it works. My application should be up and running now, so I'll go to Postman, and I will first need to create user because I have restarted my application and the existing users got all deleted. So I'll create a new user, send the HTTP post request. I have user created, and I will need to copy user ID so that I can use it to update the record stored under this user ID. So I will replace this with a new user ID, and now I will use same first name and same last name for the first attempt. I'll send this request. All is successful. HTTP status code is 200, and I get user details. User ID should match, and first name and last name all should match. Now I will update the first name. I will use I at the end and send this HTTP request again, and I get back an updated first name. Stored user details. So let's run our application now and see if it works. My application should be up and running now, so I'll go to Postman, and I will first need to create user because I have restarted my application and the existing users got all deleted. So I'll create a new user, send the HTTP post request. I have user created, and I will need to copy user ID so that I can use it to update the record stored under this user ID. So I will replace this with a new user ID, and now I will use same first name and same last name for the first attempt. I'll send this request. All is successful. HTTP status code is 200, and I get user details. User ID should match, and first name and last name all should match. Now I will update the first name. I will use I at the end and send this HTTP request again, and I get back an updated first name. Okay, so it looks like it's working. We now know how to send HTTP put request, and we know how to handle it in our REST controller. So let's continue. This video we will learn how to use @delete mapping annotation so that we can handle HTTP delete request in our REST controller, and then read path variable, which we can use to perform the delete operation. In our case, path variable is going to be user ID. So let's have a look at the Postman. And here I have an example of HTTP delete request. We are going to send HTTP delete to the following URL. So it's in my case localhost, port number, and then /users, which is my root resource class, and then / we will need to provide user ID. This will be a public ID of the user that we want to delete. And because this is HTTP delete, we are deleting user record. We are not updating, and we are not creating. We are not including anybody in our HTTP request, and we can skip the headers. We do not need to provide content type because there is nothing we are sending, and we can skip the accept header because there is nothing we are expecting back. Okay, so let's switch to our Java code, and let's first read the path variable, which is going to be user ID. So in my delete mapping, I will add path equals, and then / curly brackets ID. So that will help me to access user ID, and now I will need to make this user ID available in my method, and for that I will use path variable annotation to read a path variable, and that's going to be string data type, and I will also call it ID because my path variable is ID here. Okay, so now I have user ID available to my method, and I can simply remove this record from my users map. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use users, and then I'm going to use remove, and then give a key by which I want to remove. In our case, key is an ID because we are putting users into a hash map by using user ID as a key. Okay, and finally, this method is returning string. So we're not going to return string, we're going to return a response entity. So I'm going to use response entity, and here I'm going to return response entity output dot, and I can return OK, which will be HTTP status code 200, but because there is no content I'm returning back, I will return HTTP status 204, which means that there is no content this HTTP response carries. So I will use no content, and then this is a builder. I'll just build this response like this. And let's look up at the underline. It wants us to add a type argument. Well, this is a void, so I'm going to add void here, like this. Okay, so now let's try running this example and see if it works. I'm going to run my application. Content this HTTP response carries. So I will use no content, and then this is a builder. I will just build this response like this. And let's look up at the underline. It wants us to add a type argument. Well, this is a void, so I'm going to add void here, like this. Okay, so now let's try running this example and see if it works. I'm going to run my application. It started, so I'm going to bring up Postman, and first I'm going to create one record. Let's see if it works. I'm sending HTTP post to create a new record. Send it. It worked. Now I'm going to get the user by the ID I have just created, so I'm going to use the get send to /users, and this will be the ID by which I want to retrieve this user record. It worked, so user exists, and now I will send HTTP delete to delete this record by using the same ID. Now let's put it and send the request, and it worked. Got back HTTP status 204, which is a successful HTTP status. It means that the request was successful, but there is no content to return. Okay, now let's try getting this record and see if it was indeed deleted. I'm going to send this request, and I get back 204, no content, so HTTP request was successful, but again, because user was deleted, there is no content to return. Okay, so our HTTP delete is working, and we now know how to use add delete mapping annotation, read user ID, and do some business logic. In our case, business logic was very simple, and then return appropriate response. Okay, so let's continue.